Good morning, church. Isn't it great to be here? Or, in this case, to not be here. It's very, very strange today, isn't it? Our congregation is watching this sermon in our homes today, and it just feels bizarre and strange. It's enough to make you go, "What is going on?" Because this morning, things look like this. Or at least I hope they do. I sincerely hope that we were able to get in touch with everybody and there aren't any cars in that parking lot. But even so, doesn't that look weird for a Sunday morning? If you were to walk into the building and look down that hallway, it should have kids running up and down it just about now, or, well, a few minutes ago, I suppose, if you're watching this. Surely they wouldn't be running around during the sermon, but there should have been kids running down that hallway, and it is barrenly empty this morning. This room that I'm standing in looks like this. And as I stand here at the pulpit, I'm looking out at this instead of at your happy, smiling faces. And I have to tell you, it feels so strange preaching to an empty room, which is exactly what I'm doing. What is going on? Why are we doing this? Well, as it turns out, there is a very big, very tiny reason that we're doing this. Something that looks like that. Although if you were to look at it with your eyes, you wouldn't see that because it's too unbelievably small to see it. That's a picture of the virus COVID-19, commonly known as the coronavirus. And it is why we are doing things the way we are. I want to talk with you just a little bit about coronavirus because, I'm sure you haven't heard enough about it already. But I want to talk about it just a little bit in light of what's going on right now in our country and think about what exactly is a Christian response to that little critter. The first thing I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the mortality rate from this disease. A mortality rate is figured out by a fraction. I did not like fractions at all in math when I was learning about them in middle school and in high school. I hated fractions, but we got to deal with one for just a moment. The way you calculate a mortality rate is you take the number of people who are infected with the disease and you put that in the denominator of the fraction. And then you consider the number of people who die from the disease and you put that in the numerator, the upper part of the thing above the line. You divide the number of people who die from the disease by the number of people who were sick with it altogether, and that will give you a percentage, a mortality rate. In order to get our heads around coronavirus, I'd like to compare it to a similar disease, a cousin that it's often getting compared to, and that is influenza. The influenza of 2017-18 had 45 million infections in this country, in the United States. 45 million people got that disease. Actually, I don't know. That might be worldwide. At any rate, of that 45 million people, 61,000 of them died. Now, if you do the math, that gives you a mortality rate of about 0.13%. That's not 1%. That's 0.13%. Now, here's what that means. Here's how you figure that out. In order to be certain that you have one person dying from this disease, you would have to find not 100 sick people, but 1,000 sick people. Now, of course, if you got 1,000 sick people together in the real world, who knows how many of those might actually succumb to the disease. But statistically speaking, you'd have to have 1,000 sick people before you produced a single death with a mortality rate of 0.13%. If you wanted to find 13 deaths, you'd have to have 10,000 sick people. Now, that's a very small mortality figure. It's why the flu can happen and we don't close schools and we don't close churches and synagogues across the country. The world pretty well goes on when a sickness with a mortality rate of 0.13 hits. But now what about COVID-19? What about coronavirus? Well, it has a mortality rate that's a little bit higher. We don't actually know the number of people who have this illness yet, and we might not ever know, but it's probably around 150,000 people. It might be much greater than that, which would drive the number down, but we think it's about 150,000 people, and 5,400 of them have died. Now, obviously, that's a much, much smaller number than either 61,000 people or 45 million people. These are much smaller numbers. Of course, we're at the front end of this disease still. We don't know how many will end up being sick or how many will end up dying. But the current mortality rate looks to be about 3.5%. Folks, that's a much, much higher mortality rate. How much higher? Well, consider this. In order to find one person who had died, you wouldn't need 1,000 people, but only 33. If you had 100 people, 3 or 4 of them would probably die. In order to get to 13 people who had died, you'd need under 500 sick people. Now compare those. 13 people from 500 versus 13 people from 10,000. We are dealing with a disease that has a much, much greater likelihood of killing us than the flu. It's been compared to the flu a lot, and often compared to the flu because, after all, the flu we don't freak out about. But the flu's mortality rate is so much lower. This one is far more dangerous. Well, but the numbers are still very low. As I said, we're at the front end of this disease. It hasn't really begun to work on our country yet. Here's a reality. There is up to a 14-day incubation period. We have no symptoms, but it's still contagious, which means you could be infected with this disease and sharing it with your friends for up to 2 weeks. Worldwide, we are beginning to see this thing really explode. Each day, we're seeing just under 10,000 new cases of this disease, and the rate of its sharing is going up each day. So it's just under 10,000 as of yesterday. When I'm recording this, it's just under 10,000. Who knows what it is by today or tomorrow? We're beginning in this country to see what's called exponential growth. As of March 6th, there were just 129 confirmed cases in the United States. Not even 2 weeks later, not even 10 days later, there were 1,678 people. You see the shape of the curve in the graph next to those figures, and you can see that looks like an exponential growth factor, meaning that it will really go up fast now. The difference between exponential and linear growth is that exponential growth seems really small for a really long time until it's not anymore. And we are seeing exponential curves with this disease across the world. This chart was all the way back on March the 7th. The numbers are all much out of date, and they're all much higher now. But you see in all these countries around the world, the hockey stick curve of exponential growth as those numbers shoot up. Here's a chart that was made back on the 11th, which was last Wednesday. And as of last Wednesday, the United States had 1,100 cases of the disease. But you see, it's being compared with Italy, that 11 days prior to that, on Saturday the 29th of February, Italy also had 1,100 cases of the disease. As of March the 11th, last Wednesday, Italy didn't have 2,000 or 3,000, but 12,000 cases of this disease. As you can see, it spreads incredibly quickly. And we are now entering the phase where these cases are going to shoot up like crazy because of exponential growth. There's one other reason that we have chosen not to meet today, and that is because the mortality rate is not the same across all age groups. The data you see on the screen right there comes from China. And in China, if you were young, under 10 years old or under 20 years old, you'd see the disease was not likely to kill you. It might make you sick, but it wouldn't kill you. But if you were in your 80s, you didn't face a 3% chance, 3 out of 100, but nearly a 15% chance of dying from the disease. That means out of 100 people, 15 of them would die. If you were in your 70s, it's an 8% chance. You see, this is why this room this morning looks like this. We don't want to bring people together who might be infected and perhaps share the disease with each other, and then go out into our neighborhoods and perhaps share the disease even further. It is because of love that we do not want to share sickness with one another or with the world. The loving and Christian thing to do when faced with an epidemic like this one is to stay home. And yet, how do we respond to this? What is the Christian thing to do? What's the Christian thing to feel? How do we respond when the world around us is faced with a sudden wake-up call to its mortality? What do we do? Well, you've been listening for about 12 minutes to something that might make you feel a whole lot of fear. It might seem very depressing. It might make you feel very afraid. And it seems to me that that would be one way to respond to this. If everyone around you might have an invisible monster inside their blood, and they might be able to breathe that monster onto you, and it might get you, it seems to me that it would make a lot of sense, at least the way the world thinks, to be very, very afraid. Social distancing is a wise strategy during an epidemic, but social fear and paranoia, maybe not. There are people who might look at one another with hostility and see each other as dangers and threats. But here's the thing. We are Christians. And that approach simply won't work for us. And why is that? Because of the most often repeated commandment in the Bible. Do you know what it is? It's repeated in different ways and in different words, but it is the one that comes up the most often. Do not be afraid. Do not fear. You see, the reality is that for the person who believes in God, and who believes not just in God, but in the Christian God, who is a Christian, and knows that God loves us and cares about us, and that we matter to Him, if all of that is true, then fear simply makes no sense. It isn't that nothing bad will happen to us. We live in a cursed world. We aren't in heaven yet. Someday we will live in a world where nothing bad will ever happen to us. That's heaven. We aren't there yet. No, it's not that nothing bad will ever happen to us. It is that the bad that can happen is nothing to fear. Because if God is with us, He will get us through, or He will save us. And one way or another, we are going to be okay. God has told us not to be afraid and has always given us precisely the same reason why. You are my servant. I have chosen you and not cast you off. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. The reason not to be afraid is that God is with us. Even in these frightening times, even in these dangerous days, our God is with us to strengthen us, to help us, to save us. He says, for I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. It is I who say to you, fear not. I am the one who helps you. And he does. He says, but now thus says the Lord, he who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they will not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. He does not say, don't worry, you won't have to pass through waters. He does not say, there will be no fire for you. He says, when you pass through them, I will be with you. These are fiery days. They are watery days. We are in the midst of trouble in this country and in this world. There is threat all around, and yet we know the truth. We are not alone in these dangers. Our God is with you, and He's always been, and He always will be. He promises it is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. It is God who said, do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. It is God who said, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. It is God who said, can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you. Behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. And the one who took marks upon his hands, no holes in his hands, gave us the best reason not to be afraid. It is He who commanded us, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. Jesus Christ speaks to us now to say, believe in me. Trust in me. Put your hope in me. When your heart is worried, when you feel fear, when you're afraid and you want to act in ways that are not loving, trust in God. He will help you to love in these frightening days. He is the God of peace. Jesus Christ says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. If I did not know Jesus, I don't know if in these times I could have peace. I love so many people who are threatened by a disease, and all of it is out of my control. I can't do anything about it. And that's what the world gives to me. But Jesus gives me His peace. Not my peace, but His. I don't have to generate it because it doesn't come from me. It comes from Him, from His promise to be with me always. So I don't have to be afraid, and either do you. And how do we obey Jesus and not let our hearts be troubled? We remember this truth. God is with us. He has not abandoned us beneath the stars. We are not alone in this darkness and in this threat and in this danger. God is with us, the great one who can overcome all of it. He is with us. And we know this profound truth that once, long ago, a man who was dead stood up. He took off the clothes of death and he put on the clothes of life. And he folded up the death shroud and he left it behind. You see, we who are Christians have a reason to look at this kind of threat and this kind of danger and say, I will not be cavalier about this. I will not be foolish about this. I will not take risks that put myself or anyone else in danger. But I am not doing any of that because I am afraid. I am not afraid and will not be afraid because death has been defeated. It has been overcome and I am saved. I am safe from death, even if I die, because he has saved me. So I know about that. I know about the empty tomb. And that means that I am free from the threat of death, even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Even if death should be all around, or even if I should die, I know the truth. I am free. So while I will not take risks that might endanger anyone else, and while I will not be foolish with my life, neither will I allow the threat of death to cause me not to love. In the coming days, you should receive an email, and these will also be available at the church building to be picked up. And they're going to look like this. Should you choose to use these, and you don't have to, and there's nothing wrong with you if you don't. But I want to let you know about an approach to an epidemic that might be a blessing to you and to others, where you act as God's servant in your neighborhood. You see here the form that's on your screen, and it's a piece of paper that you could go and put on people's porches or tape to people's doors. On it, you write your name and your phone number and your address, and you let people know that if they are self-isolating, if they are choosing to try and fight the spread of COVID-19, and they're afraid, that you're there for them, that you will pray for them, that you will help them if you can, and that you will love them. Because we who are not afraid, we're not going to be foolish, but we're not going to let fear keep us from loving either, because we're not scared. And why are we not scared? Because there's not a threat? No, there's always a threat. Every time God really shines, there's always a threat. There's really a lion in that room with Daniel. There's really an Egyptian army chasing, and the dust is really rising, and there really is a sea in the way. There really is a Roman government with the power to kill when Jesus stands on trial. And yet we know the truth. There really is a threat, but there really isn't. And why? Because the Lord God is with us and he is able to overcome. And so we will not be afraid. We obey the commandment of the Lord our God, do not fear. And we obey the commandment of the Lord our God, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, because of the help of the Lord our God.